associate professor in political science, and so the state, government, institutions is my area of research and interest. But this combined with where Ryan from Course of Justice and I started to get involved with looking at the comprehensive sexuality education. And we started to look at the scripted plans which were planned for the schools into the LO programs. And we looked at these scripted plans, and from a political science perspective, I looked at this and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a complete intrusion into a sphere of authority which is not the state's. When they start to intrude into the family and into areas of morality, they are intruding into an area which is not theirs. So that's how I got involved. I'm also a mom. So it stirred up the mama bear, and and that's what actually I think, whoops, oh, okay, there was a lot of skipping forward. Now I'm giving away, yes, there, thanks God. Okay. So I think perhaps this is also part of what the Lord is doing, is He's stirring up parents. There's nothing quite like the parents to get our blood boiling when you start touching our children. And this is where we're at. So I just wanted to show you this picture to show you that this is my family. We do family. We love family. We enjoy family. So you will meet my husband a little bit later, but there he is in the picture. We've got 2 boys. They're teenagers, and I enjoy them very much. The youngest is 14, the eldest is 16, and I know people speak the fear of the teenagers into us, but I've not yet experienced that. They are just such an absolute joy. Yes, the youngest pushes the boundaries, but they're actually really, really enjoyable. Maybe it's because I don't have girls, but I'm sure. But they are wonderfully enjoyable. So we live with, we have my brother and his family lives close by, so we do extended family. My parents, actually, we do dual living. So the grandparents live with us. Philip's mom lives close by. She's now with our boys at the moment. So we really do lots of family. We love family. It's an amazing blessing, and it's good. So we're enormously grateful for it. And this is the institution which is really under attack at the moment. And we're going to go, I'm going to go into why and what is happening and where does all of this come from. So I'm going to have a little bit of a look into the bigger picture. So I want you to hang in there with me, but firstly to start with a scripture which is quite close to my heart. It's one of the scriptures that the Lord gave me when I started in the academia, so 20 years ago, and I was feeling rather insecure in myself, and people were using all these very big words, and they sounded so clever, and I felt myself to be very not suited to the environment, ran to the room and said, Lord, why are you putting me here? Am I supposed to be here? Maybe I shouldn't be here at all. And these are the words that He gave me. But it's words that I think, especially also for this year, that have become very, very accentuated and highlighted. And I think the reason being is that Paul was writing in a time and a period, yes, 2,000 years ago, but it really is, we are coming back to that time. We are finding ourselves in that time and that period. So his letters just resonate with the period in which we find ourselves. So he was speaking to the Colossians. He was addressing heresy and false teaching in the church. Let's have a look at what heresy is. Heresy is to choose for oneself. And a heretic is one who places their choice and opinion above the authority of God. So there was syncretism starting to happen right in the beginning in the church. A syncretism, a pulling together, a mixing of Greek philosophy, Jewish legalism, and mysticism. So there was an early form of this Gnosticism where they started to argue that Jesus was merely one of the semi-divine beings, and they were moving and mixing it in and bringing in a return to pagan ways and pagan vices. So I want to argue that this is where we are now. Okay, so let's read it. Colossians 2, verses 2 to 8. In order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And that's just such a, I think, I want that to just settle with us. So for me as an academic, as a young academic, it was just that, wow, in Christ, in whom all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, that's where we have our access. And it's about seeking Him out to understand that knowledge. I tell you this so that no one may deceive you by fine-sounding arguments. So then, just as you receive Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in Him, rooted and built up in Him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ. So there are two things that I take from this. There's obviously much more, but the one is, firstly, live our lives in Christ. Be completely and utterly embedded in His Word, because in Him is all wisdom and knowledge. And the second is, and He says it twice, do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. So this is part of what we are doing, is trying to understand what is going on in the world around us so that we are not taken captive by it, by these empty philosophies and by the elemental spiritual forces of this world. It is important to recognize that Paul did not encourage the early church to ingratiate themselves into the culture in which they found themselves. And this is where we sit, and we have to be careful we're not ingratiating ourselves into the culture. So I'm glad I got the morning slot, and you've had your coffee. I'm also really glad, but I also needed my coffee. So I wasn't sure how much time. I said to my husband, please, won't you give me a coffee? So I trusted we were all awake. So hang in there with me. I'm going to do quite a bit of an overview of where I think we are in terms of, yes, there's complexity inside of this. So this is a broad overview so that we can understand where we've come from and where we are today. So I'm rereading a book by Professor Larry Siedentop, Inventing the Individual. Just an incredible, I think, tour de force of academic literature. And just showing the influence he's looking at. It looks like he's writing about the West, but he's actually writing about the influence of Christianity over a long period of time. And he's tracing it all the way from showing the ancient world, the ancient Greek, ancient Roman world, and then when Christ comes into that context and that environment. So in this BC world, before Christ's world, this ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the norm was social inequality, where society was defined in terms of social categories. So I'm hoping that some of these things are going to start being, oh my goodness, there is nothing new under the sun. Social inequality, and there was polytheism. It was a pagan era. There was an ordering of society in terms of these social categories. Only the male elders were citizen class, so only they could vote. Only they were part of the political system. Women, slaves, and foreigners were non-citizens without rights, without value. So this is a system of inherent inequality in terms of value. They were inherently unequal, and everything was defined in terms of your social categories. So only the elder man had access to the ancestors and to the deities. So all kind of communication happened through the paterfamilias to the deities and to the ancestors, and they used to have a fire and they used to keep the hearth alive, and this religious system translated into the political system of inequality and hierarchy. Into this, Jesus Christ is born. And what happens is that on the cross, He dies and He gives us access to the divine, everyone. Not because of our social categories, but irrespective of. He undoes an entire system of actual social categories which created a deeply unequal, inherently unequal society. And He creates a society of equality of value. where everybody has inherent value because their Savior dies for them and gives them direct access to God, not through a human, not through an ancestor, and not through any other form of communication, but through Jesus. So it's a religion which then completely reforms over time a political system because it brings in moral inherent equality in terms of value of every person. So it established innate human value because we are loved by God, and personal responsibility because we will be judged by God. So the two are important, the value, but also the responsibility, the personal responsibility. And then, like humans, we get things wrong, and there was a lot of ebb and flowing in terms of the influence of Christianity in this Judaic Christian world. And we started to bring back deities, we started to bring back relics, and we started to communicate to ancestors again. And then we had to have another reset with the Reformation. So then, 16th century Reformation, it brings in a renewed Christian Judaic era. We've got Martin Luther who staples or hammers, sorry, not a stapler, a hammer, a good hammer, must have been a good hammer, hammers the 95 Theses onto the door, where he says that we are saved by faith in Christ Jesus alone and not by works. And we realize that there is a God, we are not him, and our religious leaders are also not him. So we again get back to how do we access the divine? We access the divine through Jesus. And so we start to see this worldview of the natural and the supernatural. So together the natural, the Creator creates the natural, but he is also supernatural, and we engage with him as a supernatural and a spiritual way. So yes, it moves into a time of 30 years of war. So the Protestants and the Catholics, they wore it out, and they didn't actually come to an agreement at the end. They actually were just so exhausted by fighting with each other, they agreed to disagree. But it brings in a period of 500 years that takes a long time of human flourishing, and this is what we forget, and this is part of the lie that we are being told now. If you go and have a look at the life expectancy, the average life expectancy of someone in the 17th century, 29 years. I think I saw a young person. You'd be perhaps one of the only people, I don't know, there's a couple of young people. 29 years. World life expectancy was 29. In Europe, the world life expectancy at the moment is between 80 and 85. I think we're in the 60s with Africa. But in general, the life expectancy has improved exponentially. So we have been in a period which has ushered in a time of flourishing, human flourishing. Imperfectly so, but flourishing. Then we move into the 16th century. Sorry, that was the 16th century, the 17th century, which is the secular humanist era. So the secular humanist era said, well, thanks God, that was very nice. We appreciate what you did, but we don't need you anymore. We're going to put ourselves on the throne. So then the secular humanist era then takes God off the throne and puts man on the throne. It brings in a period of science, rationalism, logic, truth can be known, but it's man on the throne as opposed to God on the throne. So we've done away with the supernatural, and there's only the natural, only that which we can see and we can measure. So remember, with the Reformation, we've got the supernatural, the natural, and the spiritual. So they still recognize that their foundations are Christianity. So it's interesting being in an academic environment, which has largely been secular humanist. And I will show this one slide where it's a slide which actually is projecting, into the future, Protestant Christianity. So then it shows Europe, and it shows obviously from the Reformation this growth in terms of Protestantism, and then the sharp decline into Europe. Then Africa and Latin America is completely different. So it obviously is growing. You start seeing the sharp increase. So I look at this and I get quite excited. But my colleagues look at this and they go, oh, well, there's no hope for Africa. And they get excited because what they see is actually, they see themselves as maturing. That's an evolutionary process. So for secular humanists, the idea is that you grow out of your Christian roots. They recognize their Christian roots, they recognize their history, but they say that's the evolution of the person. We grow out of that. So they're kind of like kind of tolerant, but it's like, kind of like this kind of, oh, Shane, you'll get there, you know. And then I look at this and I go, well, if I look at the history of what Christianity did to your region, then I can get excited about Africa and what it can do for us. So, but there was this kind of disdainful tolerance, should we say. So like I agree to disagree, and okay. But now we're in a very different period. So I would argue that we are now in the 20th century into postmodernism, which is ushering in a return to the pagan era. So what I find interesting, and I'm sure you've encountered it, is when people say, I'm on the school governing body for my kids in the high school, and then they say, well, some of the things that are happening at the moment, they go, yeah, but you must get with the times, and this is what's happening at the moment, and we are progressing. And these are the modern things, and we need to embrace them. And I'm like, no, but we're not progressing. I've seen this. It happened like more than 2,000 years ago. There's not progress. We're going backwards into an era of paganism. So I would argue that we're now in this postmodernism. So what is postmodernism? It's actually a reaction to the Enlightenment, to secular humanism. It's broadly skeptical. It believes in subjectivism as opposed to objectivity. Everything is relative. So exactly everything what Rachel said, they would dislike it completely because you can't measure anything. Everything is how you feel, and it's how you subjectively understand things. It's relativistic, and there's a general suspicion of reason. So we're seeing this return to mysticism and paganism. So we had the rejection of the supernatural and just the natural. Now we're having a rejection of the natural, and there's a void. So it's a return to the supernatural, but it's not God. So it's a return to polytheism, multiple gods, nature, veneration of nature, the worship of many deities, goddesses, gods. And often pagan religions tend to recognize the more feminine face, you know, that everything emanates from a goddess. So the feminine face of divinity. And interestingly for us, and I think we're experiencing more and more, a very hostile environment, where there was an agreeing to disagree, where you could have discussion and engagement. There isn't discussion and engagement. There is now, this is what it is, you will accept it, or I get to call you all sorts of names, and I get to delegitimize you. So we find ourselves, and I think many of us got a little bit of a shock, thinking that we were still having discussions, and thinking that we could still sit down over coffee and talk about it, or have a presentation and not be shut down or cancelled or deplatformed. But we're not in that environment anymore. So we have to start, as Andrew said, start counting the cost. We have to start actually recognizing where we are. Okay, so this is kind of, I did a bit of a picture word with some of the words that you've probably come up with. Some of them you might have thought are actually quite nice. So I'm just going to grab some water. So this is the woke culture, and these are the words. To be woke is to be aware and alert to the supposed layers of oppression in society surrounding race, sex, gender, and economic status. It may feel like a fairly recent development, but this movement has a long history, and what we are seeing today is merely a reformulation and a repackaging of what has very deep historical roots. It's just making it a lot more palatable, and it's difficult to question. In fact, you're actually not allowed to question it, because then you are hateful. That's one of the big words at the moment. And this hashtag, be kind, ring a bell. But if you're not kind, then you are hateful. The woke movement presents itself as a movement for social justice and the weak. So we get entangled in it because it also uses our language. We are the ones who are supposed to look after the poor. We are the ones who are supposed to look after the orphan and the widow. That's our role. We're supposed to be the ones who help the weak. And so they take on our language, and then we get confused and we think, oh, okay, this is actually what we're supposed to be doing. So I want to unpack it and show you that it is not the same. So it uses Christian concepts and Christian expectations, but want to say that it ostensibly weakens the people it claims to help. It weakens them and forever binds them and places them in a place of perpetual victimhood and oppression. Takes away their agency and takes away their personal responsibility. So, the ideological roots. Okay, the ideological roots. So, we hear about decolonization, and it comes from this movement and this ideology. And I always go, okay, fine, can we start with these guys? And we can remove them first if we're going to do this. Okay, so who are these people? So starting at your left is Hegel. So we're going to delve into this history because we need to understand the intentions and the motivations of the drafters of the philosophies. Remember, those vain philosophies, do not be deceived by them. So Hegel, 18th, 19th century, he's a German philosopher. He developed the dialectical scheme. You might have heard the word dialectic, comes up quite often now, the dialectical scheme. So what he said is that history was progressing and that the ideas moved from thesis, an idea, into an antithesis, and then the antithesis goes into synthesis. Don't worry about the things, but basically what he is saying is we're actually progressing towards a utopia. A utopia is an end goal where everyone's going to be happy, but it is an unattainable end goal on this earth now before Jesus comes back. But inside of us is this idea of eternity, so we think that we can create eternity in terms of a utopia here. So he is a utopian thinker. He says that we are progressing towards utopia, but to get there, we need a revolution. Okay, so just think of the words. They'll come up. You'll hear them. Into this comes Karl Marx. Karl Marx was quite taken with Hegel's ideas, but he was a materialist. So I'm going to have to keep at that water break. He saw everything as only natural and materialistic, especially economic, and he divided society into a binary, the oppressed and the oppressors. Ring a bell? He said that the rich oppressed the poor, always. So the rich were bad, the poor were good. And he said that we needed a dictatorship of the proletariat, the proletariat is the working class, the poor, to create an equal society. So you needed to overthrow, through revolution, overthrow the rich, the bourgeoisie, and then you would have a dictatorship. So that it is a dictatorship, so not looking for a democracy. It's a dictatorship of the poor or the working class over the rest of society, and that will eventually create an equal society, and that will create a utopia. And everybody, when you have eventually this class, the society has never happened. You can just go look at the Soviet Union, Communist China, North Korea, Cuba, thank you, Venezuela. Never, the state just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more oppressive. But the idea was that the state would disappear, but it's never happened. So one of the problems here was the bourgeoisie, but it wasn't just the bourgeoisie, it was faith and family. And family stood in the way of this utopia, and what I've just now discovered, the other thing is for them is they see the family as standing in the way of free love. So because family requires commitment to one person and a consistent commitment, and then that doesn't allow you to exercise your supposedly sexual rights. So it's interesting that now how it all pins into this idea of free love. And now we're moving into not just our sexual rights, but the sexual rights of children. So what about the responsibilities? Okay, so God, can we go to the next one? This is where I need to go forward and back, if you don't mind. So I just wanted to quickly show you, this is Karl Marx. This is what he says. Thereafter, for example, the earthly family is discovered. Therefore, after, for example, the earthly family is discovered as a secret of the Holy Family, the former must itself be theoretically and practically destroyed. And if we can see, if we go one forward as well, please, Garth, thanks. The Marxist ideology. So this is in the Soviet Union, and this was a schooling theorist. So this is to see the outworking of these ideas. We must make the young into a generation of communists. Children, like soft wax, are very malleable, and they should be molded into good communists. We must rescue children from the harmful influence of the family. We must nationalize them from the earliest days of their little lives. They must find themselves under the beneficent, the great, the benign, the kind, the all-good influence of the communist schools. To oblige the mother to give her child to the Soviet state, that is our task. Okay. So Karl Marx was for the abolition of the family. Thanks. Okay, so where are we now? We're Karl Marx, and then we move on to the final picture, which is Antonio Gramsci. So one of the problems that the communists had is that they expected the working class to rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie. So this happened in the Soviet Union, and then World War I was the obvious time for them that the working class in the Western European countries would rise up against the landed class and overthrow them. And yet this didn't happen. So World War I happens, and then actually what we see is that people start to defend their families, they defend their faith, they defend values like liberty and freedom, and they defend their churches, and they defend their countries. So they looked at this, these theorists looked at this and thought, well, what happened here? And why did the working class not use this as the moment to overthrow? And then they started to develop an idea of cultural hegemony. So they say that what is happening is the working class is actually controlled by the culture in which they find themselves in. And so what we need to do is we need to upend that culture. We need to liberate the working class from this culture so that they can realize that they are actually oppressed, so that they can then liberate themselves. And this is where it starts. So Antonio Gramsci, he's an Italian communist. He viewed churches, charities, media, schools, universities, etc., as organizations that needed to be invaded by socialist thinking. He's credited with writing the blueprint of the so-called long march through the institutions. He didn't write that phrase. It was actually a student activist, Rudi Dutschke, in 1967 who wrote this. But what Gramsci said in the 1930s is that they needed a war of position. So what he was meaning by this was trench warfare rather than full frontal warfare. So the full frontal warfare would be too obvious. It would be a war of movements. But what he was talking about was a war of position, was to infiltrate these institutions with socialist ideas, to go into the trenches and to infiltrate what he spoke about as being the private sphere. The private sphere would be civil society, churches, universities, schools, etc., because that was where the culture was being formed, and they needed to change the culture. And so to eventually generate their own ideological hegemony into these institutions. So in this is now born the Frankfurt School. Okay, so now we're starting to move down into the next row. The Frankfurt School. So you can see why people call this cultural Marxism in terms of it moving into the institutions and to change the culture. But it's now used as a pejorative. So we should be careful of using cultural Marxism because we often just cancel because when we use it. So that's why the term is coming from the Frankfurt School and then develops into critical theory. So the Frankfurt School, the Institute for Social Research was established at the University of Frankfurt in Germany. It was established after World War I, so it is socialist and communist in thinking. And the scholars were known for their brand of culturally focused neo-Marxist theory. Now, you can say that culturally, focused neo-Marxist theory, a rethinking of classical Marxism. And it was here in the Frankfurt School that the term critical theory was coined, 1937. Okay, so this now feeds into, on the one side, but on the other side, we see the postmodernism. So postmodernism is developed 1960s, a fairly more recent development, ideological development. And some would argue that it's just a kind of a repackaged form of Marxism. So phase one, 1960s, 1990s, there's its response to modernism. It's deconstructivist. It wants to deconstruct these materialist understandings. They want to deconstruct the objective reality, reason, rationality, and so forth. It's skeptical. In literature, this amounted to a reaction against an ordered view of the world. Postmodernists reject that there is an objective natural reality. They reject reason and knowledge. They say there's no such thing as human nature, only human psychology, which has been socially engineered or socially constructed. There's no objective reality and all is relative. So rather, knowledge is a construct of power. When you take away reason and rationality and objectivity and science, for those of you who do empirical research, you test things to see if it works, and you have test and control groups, and you try and understand what comes out, and that's where you get a little more. It's the endeavor to understand truth. It's through the testing and looking at reality and finding it. And this is the empirical research. So they want to throw all of this out in terms of the empirical research. When you do that, all that is left is power. So they argue that it is power before, but actually once they've actually just deconstructed everything, the reality is they're left with what they said was there before, is just power. So when you're having a discussion with someone and you're trying to have a rational discussion and you're trying to deal with objective arguments and engagement and you're looking at examples and that, it's difficult because everything is relative and it's only their feelings and you've got nothing to engage with them on. And so actually it moves into a place of power. So they get to shut you down irrespective of whether what you're saying is true or not, because we're dealing in a world of power. And that's why it's so difficult for us to engage in this world, because if they are in a position of power, they get to dictate. So some of you might have experienced this, and all of a sudden you're like, well, why can't we have a sit down and have a conversation? Because they're sitting in a place of this now, this virtue of a moral ground, that they're high ground, and they get to now dictate. Okay, so the phase two, 1990s to 2000, we start to see an applying of this. First of all, it's really kind of like an academic. It's philosophers, and they're trying to think and they're trying to deconstruct, but then it starts to move into an applied or activist area. So we start to see the development of queer theory, critical race theory, fat studies, feminist studies, grievance studies, gender theory, decolonial studies. And they're trying to reconstruct society, trying to supposedly break down these power relations, and then it becomes applied in very specific fields and activist circles. And the expectation was that it would stay there, but it didn't. The expectation was it would never go into the STEM fields, the maths, the biology, the medicine, the sciences. But we move into phase three, which is from 2010 onwards, and we start to see what we call the reification of their ideas. And what we mean by reification is it means it's made real. So their thinking and their ideas now are less deconstructivist than it is real. So in other words, these principles became known knowns. So society is structured on specific identity systems of power and privilege. So in other words, we're not talking about whether there is racism. Society is systematically or systemically racist. So the church is systemically homophobic or haters. It is systemically. So it moves from the position where their ideas have now become reified, established truths. So in schools, we see it in the schools, is that so if you have an incident where there is perhaps a racial incident, then the school, of course you're going to have that racial incident because the school is systemically racist. You see how it's become reified. So they move from a position of it is. So now into this is fed into both the postmodernists, the Frankfurt School, or Marxism or cultural Marxism, we see critical theory. So, or you would have heard woke, the woke culture, the woke movement, or social justice. Now, social justice is the one we feel more probably uncomfortable with because, and I'm going to engage with why it isn't actually Christian, but it's this idea of a fairer society, which sounds nice. It does sound nice. But how we get there is problematic. So there are two primary claims of critical theory. The first claim is everyone can be divided into two groups, those who have power and those who do not have power. The second claim is those who have power oppress those who do not have power, always. So it's interesting, I'm a woman, so I sit on the oppressed group, but I'm also white, and I'm also Protestant, so I'm now also on the oppressor group. But I had a conversation with a student of mine, and I said to him, we sit in the power position. I have 20 years on you. I sit with the titles which you don't have, but I don't use that to oppress you. I use my position because I want to see you successful. I use the knowledge that I have to read your work and to help you be all and to flourish. So this idea that every time someone's in a position of power that they use it to oppress, but that is the binaries in which they now see society. And I'm going to show you, in case you don't know where you sit in terms of your oppressor and oppressor, don't worry, the critical theorists tell us. So we've got clear delineations of where you sit. We'll get there. It's called the matrix of oppression. So very important knowledge. The degree to which you are oppressed determines your level of moral authority. Okay. So out of this, sorry, no, not yet. Not yet. Sorry, God, can we go back? I'm going to get to the matrix now. I just wanted to show you that out of this critical theory comes the gender theory. As I said, the gender theory, the grievance studies, etc. But the gender theory is interesting because it's a branch of the social justice paradigm, and it's really the one that's coming into the schools. So its roots are in feminist theory and feminist ideology, but now we are no longer dealing with biological realities of male and female, so we're no longer dealing with sex, so we're now dealing with gender, which is a social construct, so which is really, your old school feminists are in an absolute disarray and are also being vilified because female sports is, if we continue along this line, there is no female sports because the top sports people are now men in female sports. So out of this we have gender theory, and it's key in its manifestations in the idea of intersectionality. I'm giving you lots of terms. Intersectionality is this, it's the degree of your oppression. So how oppressed are you? The intersectionality is I'm a female, I'm disabled, I'm Hispanic. I become more and more oppressed because of these intersectionality of these things, and then I get more and more moral authority. Can you see the social categories have come back? We are now defined in terms of our social categories again. Our race, our gender, our sex, our social status, everything that Jesus turned upside down. Okay. I wanted to also say into this, I don't know if Rachel is going to go into Dr. John Money and those people. So this is interesting for me. So Dr. John Money, so if you go into the gender theory and your sexual reassignment, you get to Dr. John Money. So Dr. John Money was a psychologist and a sexologist. He was the first one to develop the idea that gender is socially constructed. He established the first clinic which performed sexual reassignment, but he is a highly controversial figure. So he believed that gender is socially constructed. So when the case happened, there was a family, the Remes, R-E-I-M-A, Remes, and they had two babies, twin boys, and they had a botched circumcision on the one boy, David. So unfortunately, they burnt off his penis. So this little boy, this little baby, then the parents take him, and Dr. John Money thinks, well, this is the moment to show that actually gender is just socially constructed. So he reconstructed this little boy into looking like a little girl. And he grew up with his parents telling him he's a little girl, and he grew up very confused because he didn't understand why he didn't want to play with the girls, why he wanted to climb the trees, why he wanted to be rough and tough. And eventually the parents admitted that actually you were born a boy. And what happened is that he committed suicide at 38, and his brother died of an overdose at 36. So this is the science on which much of this gender theory and gender ideology is built. And actually, he disproved himself. That's also for me, because clearly he didn't actually reconstruct his gender. Am I done? Okay, and then the queer theory. The queer theory for me is interesting because I've also recently learned what queer theory really is. Queer theory is a rejection of norms. It's actually a rejection of norms, and it's a liberation from the normal. So I fortunately miss it. There's an academic, and he's written a book about bringing in queer theory into the school curriculum. So their whole idea is social activism into the schools, into the school curriculum, and what they want to do is they want to upend the norms that we have in society. So things like heteronormativity. So it's a pejorative term that they use. They say that heteronormativity in terms of male and female as a norm is problematic and must be overturned, and they're wanting to bring this into the schools and school curriculums. Okay. I think now we're going to go forward because we did Marx. Can we go to the matrix of oppression? So just in case you were wondering where you sit, you don't have to wonder anymore. The sociologist, it's a book. This is from the book Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. Is it a bit small? Okay. So the two main columns that are important here are the privileged social groups. So let me make it clear. These are the oppressors. And then the targeted social groups, and these are the oppressed. And in between, you're kind of moving between the one and the other, or you're kind of halfway there. And then there are the social categories. So society is now ordered and structured in terms of social categories according to this ideology. So the privileged groups, white people, biological men, gender conforming, so men who think they are biologically men because they are biologically men, and women who think they're biologically women because they are biologically women. Heterosexual people, so men who like women and women who like men. The rich, the upper class, the temporarily abled, it's a bit ominous. And then the Protestants, so all of you here, I assume, since you're at the Baptist Church, and then adults. Okay, so again, most of you here. So, and then the targeted groups or the oppressed, Asian, Black, Latino, Native people. Sorry, I was wrong. Biological women. So even if we identify as women, we are in the target group. Then transgender. Intersex people, lesbians, gay, homosexual, working class, poor people, people with disabilities. You get one tick on that one. You do well. Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, and then the elders and the young people. Okay. So this one's a little more easier to read, or it's a little more condensed in case you were not yet sure where you sit. So I want to put here I put here the Trojan horse, because what it's coming in with is it looks nice. It looks like a gift. But inside the Trojan horse, so the Trojan horse comes with, and I don't know if any of you have companies and you've had diversity training or you are being encouraged to do diversity training, please be very aware of what it is that you are doing. So the Trojan horse comes in the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it sounds very nice. But it isn't what you think it is. This is typical Orwellian doublespeak. So be careful of these supposedly ubiquitous terms. And that's why we sound awful when we go, could you please define that? Very important. Would you mind defining what do you mean by diversity? When you say diversity, what do you mean? So I went to one of these, there's an entire industry which has been built up, multi-million-dollar industry around this diversity, especially with diversity training. So Robin DiAngelo, you might have heard of her. So she does that white fragility. So if you want to hear, for those of you who are white, you want to hear how awful you are, you can spend 324,000 Rand for an hour and she'll come and hate all over you and tell you just how awful you are. This is what she's charged. She's American. I think when I did the sums for 324,000 an hour. So she's doing this so-called diversity training. But on their book, I want one of the sites, and it's very nice. It looks very, very pretty and very sweet with flowers and that. And then it says, what are they doing? They're creating a culture of acknowledging, embracing, supporting, and accepting those of racial, sexual, gender, religious, and socioeconomic backgrounds, among other differentiators. Now, it sounds nice, but can you see it's identity politics? It's the categories. We now have to see each other in terms of categories. We're not seeing each other as humans with innate human value, irrespective of those things. Now we have to see people and we have to value them differently. You are more valuable because you are disabled. You are more valuable because you're homosexual. You are more valuable because you're a female. You are less valuable because you're male. You are less valuable because you're able. You are less valuable because you're Protestant. And now we are being taught how we must value people on social categories. And the concern here is, if you read it, it says embracing, supporting, and accepting. So this is where we get stuck, because we can mutually respect people. I respect you. I respect the decisions you make. I respect the lifestyle that you've chosen, but I don't agree. And we're not allowed to agree, because the move now is accept. So it's an accepting. So what is diversity? Diversity is about diversity of the social categories, but uniformity of thought. So what we're seeing, especially in the university, is there's no pluralism in terms of thought anymore. So the whole big thing is they are really pushing against academic freedom, because we don't want diversity of thought, because some thoughts are not acceptable. Some thoughts are ugly and hateful and hurtful and offensive, and we've got to keep them out. But our diversity is in terms of our numbers, in terms of the social categories. But it's even becoming more complicated than that, because in this table expresses it. So the oppressed are those with whiteness. So someone like a Candace Owen, who is a young, upcoming, very vibrant Republican in America. If you've ever seen her, she's really a fountain of energy. But because she's Republican, she's black female, but because she's Republican, she will now be considered white. Because she doesn't, and she speaks with more Christian, she's got a Christian background, but so she's got whiteness. So it's a political term, and it's even less just a physical term, but now a political term, because it's about uniformity of thought and thinking rather than just the external. What does equity mean? Equity is not equality. So when Jesus came and we have equal access to God through Jesus, he gives us innate human value. We are morally equal. What this is not that. It's equity, it's equal outcome. So irrespective of what you put in, you must expect the same outcome. So they want to create the same outcome, and I want to say this, so through redistribution, this is communism. When I take from someone what someone has and I give to what someone else, to that they come with the same outcome, it's communism. So this is Marx, and I mean, they actually even use the words, obviously they don't say it's Marx. From Marx, he says, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Whereas there is a natural inequality in all societies. Yes, some of it is not good, and some of it is good. But some of the people, like I look at some of my friends who are incredibly successful and live in houses that I don't want to maintain. I want them to have those houses. I can't think of trying to maintain those houses. But they were entrepreneurs. They took risks, which we would not take. That's why we're in the public sector and we are lecturers, because we don't take them, and that's fine. But I don't covet what they have because I understand that they had to take risks that we didn't take. Don't get to have what they have, and it's okay, I don't want it. I'm happy to not have it. But there are also those of you who are studying or have studied or want to put your kids in university, you are investing in them because you expect a better life for them. You expect them to flourish. You invest because you think there was going to be an outcome. You work hard for them, or you make sacrifices for them because there's an expectation. So when anyone goes to university, they get a degree with the expectation they're going to get a good job. And so it's counter to all of those inputs. There's an expectation of a singular output. Okay, so that's what they mean by equity. It is not the equality of value that we are expecting. So have I done? Yeah, the inclusion is acceptance. So we are not, because we're not accepting, we don't fall inside the inclusion because we differ. Okay, so why is this inconsistent? Why is critical theory inconsistent with Christianity? Is everyone with me? Yeah, okay. Okay, inconsistencies of critical theory with Christianity. So I put this into a table. Critical theory is not consistent with Christianity because it offers a different view of humanity. Critical theory says our identity and our value is measured in terms of social categories: race, gender, social status, sex, etc. But the Bible says that we are all created in the image of God. All of us are created in the image of God. And we are image bearers of God. Each of us is an image bearer. And our identity is rooted in our Creator. And our Creator, as the one who created us, gets to determine our identity. Since when does the computer get to go to the IT guy and say, well, I know you designed me, but I'm actually a vacuum cleaner? We don't get to self-identify. Our Creator determines our identity. Okay, so there's inherent value, and that's the beauty of it. And this is what is happening to our kids, is that they are coming to upend and destroy the inherent value. And this is also where families, this is our role as parents, is we get to speak into their identity. Sjoch, my boy, that was really well done. I've seen those muscles. Oof. I mean, I have to feel the muscles and go, that's very strong. And I know that you're the most handsome. Goodness, you're the most handsome boy, and you're so strong. And won't you help me? Yes, you know that I can't do this. Can you help me with that? And we affirm their identities as men and women, and this is what has been undercut. In their image as God has created them. Secondly, sin and forgiveness. Critical theory offers a different view of sin. For us, sin is missing the mark, and we have all sinned. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we are all in need of a Savior. Whereas for them, there is a definite, the oppressed are the good. They have not sinned, they're good. And the higher you up in terms of the intersectionality ladder, the better you are, the more moral authority, the gooder you are. Doesn't sound right, does it? And then on the oppressor side, you're just evil, and obviously the worse you are, the more eviler. See, you also get to make up words. Whereas we know that all are sinners and all need forgiveness. On the critical theory side, there is no forgiveness. So for those where they are good, they're not sinners, therefore they don't need forgiveness. Can you see how this keeps everybody away from Christ and everybody away from being set free? So they don't need Christ because of their social categories, they are good. And certain categories, you are always bad because if you were born male and you're white, that's it. It's over. It's done. You're determined forever. And you can just be sorry. But you won't be forgiven. So with salvation for critical theory, you can virtue signal. So you can say how awful you are and you virtue signal. This is the woke culture, and you're constantly in shame. For those who are on the oppressed side, you don't need salvation. You don't need salvation. That is almost the worst for me, is that keeping people away from knowing and understanding that they are in need of a Savior. And then on the Christianity side, is Jesus died for us, and He's the standard, and we can never live up to that standard. Therefore, we need Him, so we repent, and He gives us forgiveness. And far as the east is from the west, He removes our sins from us, and He makes us white as snow because of Him, and not because of us, and not because of any social category. So social justice is the more stickier one. Isaiah 30 says the Lord is a God of social justice. The Lord is a God of justice. He is a God of justice. He's a God of love, and He's a God of justice. Love and truth. He loves us, but He also judges. Love, truth. So justice, and I think if we look at Lady Justice, so justice is what the state does. The state implements justice, and it's supposed to implement it on the basis of impartiality, and that's why she wears the mask? What's the blindfold? Thank you. That's why she wears the blindfold. Because when she judges on, okay, so you stole the car from this person on that day, and these are the witnesses. Yes, you are guilty of theft, and here's the justice for you. I don't see anything else except for what happened, and I understand from the witnesses. So justice is getting what you deserve, and it's applied impartially. Social justice is getting what you do not deserve, so the mask or the blindfold is removed, and then I consider, how were you feeling that day? You're feeling really angry. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no, you should have taken that car. Or you had a really bad break as a young person. It was a tough childhood, and you felt the needs that you needed to get back to society. So I judge on the basis of partiality, and then I give you what you do not deserve. Okay, so this is an incredible scripture for me. It's quite powerful. Leviticus 19 verses 15, do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do you know that throughout our Constitution is the word impartiality? It's amazing, actually. So the theory of natural rights is the rights which belong to an individual are such. So the idea which we often our legal systems are built on natural rights, and this theory of natural rights is actually pre-social. It's on the basis of human equality. This is one of the legacies of a Judeo-Christian worldview, is that your natural rights on the basis of our pre-social equality, innate human equality. But, and they're to be protected impartially by an impartial judiciary. Social justice asks for social rights to be applied partially in accordance with social categories. So Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is, I hope some of you read it, just a really incredible and influential economist. He would also suffering from whiteness. But he really has amazing, his stuff is incredible. And he said the following: we seem to be getting closer and closer to a situation where nobody is responsible for what they did, but we are all responsible for what somebody else did. And can you see how it's taken away that thing of personal responsibility? It's taken away innate human value, and it's taken away human personal responsibility. We are all individually responsible. So the critical theory, gender theory, argues that it's not just economics that creates oppression, but the nuclear family, traditional morality, and concepts of race, gender, and sexual identity. These are the chains of tyranny which must be broken by revolution. So I want to now get into the real stuff when it comes to the family. So I want to show you a clip from a feminist who is arguing for the abolition, because if family is part of this oppression, and it's expected family is part of creating the system and structure, remember the cultural structure of oppression, then the family must be disrupted.
Family abolition is about the proliferation of relationships of care, not a kind of destruction of the relationships we already have. Capitalism and capitalist states rely really heavily on the family as a unit of social discipline, social order, austerity, and a source of huge amounts of unpaid labor. In the history of feminism, abolishing the family was, very well known as a demand, particularly in the 60s and 70s amongst certain strands of women's liberation, including Shulamith Firestone's famous The Dialectic of Sex, where she talks about children's liberation and a world in which children and women would have much more autonomy over the households in which they live. It's feminists who have mounted an analysis of the private nuclear household as the site of the overwhelming majority of the rape and abuse that takes place on Earth. Family abolition means that we deserve more. We deserve more than the sort of blackmail that tells us that we must be content with relationships defined as blood or as nature, the relationships we find given to us. It means that we could develop forms of comradeliness, forms of chosen, or in the phrase of the xenofeminists, sort of xenofam. Xenofam can be as good as, at least as good as, relationships of sort of biological or biogenetic nature. So that's one way of thinking about abolition as a process of building and growing all the kind of forms of love and care and solidarity that we deserve.
I was with her when she said, family builds social order and austerity, and I was like, yes, it sounds good, actually. Imagine it, and that's exactly what it does. It brings structure, because we actually teach our kids, how do you interact with people? Well, you actually are respectful, and you also need to understand that there are things like you need to stop at the stop street, or you walk at the crossroad, or things like that. But that's the order and the structure, and it's also a social net of safety and protection that the family offers. But can you see the free love coming through? Because the family stands against the idea of free love, and we can do what we want to do. Okay, so just wanted to show you that it's not just, and that is carried through. Do you see the dialectic? The dialectic of sex, and you see the bringing in of capitalism. So a lot of the Marxist ideas get pulled through into even of the feminism. Okay, so this is a little bit of the experience that I had with this coming into our schools, the comprehensive sexuality education, and credit to organizations like 4SA, Cause for Justice, and I know that there are many who are developing alternative programs within the life orientation program. So the comprehensive sexuality education scripts came from with massive funding from international funding from UNESCO. And so the government felt under pressure to push this into the schools and to make it compulsory into the life orientation. But these organizations pushed back sufficiently that they are merely guidelines. So if you are in your school, and I please encourage you, if you don't do it, to always ask, can you please tell me, are you using the comprehensive sexuality education curriculum? And could you please show me that? And my child is not allowed to participate in those things. We have to stand up as parents. And they are not, schools are not under compulsion to use these scripted plans. There are alternative plans. I know I met someone who's already, they are produced alternative programs that they can do as part of the life orientation. So this is not just a comprehensive sexuality education. In the Western Cape, they are busy drafting legislation at the moment on gender identity and sexual orientation in public schools. So this is just in the Western Cape. So this is the excerpt, the purpose of it, and they're hoping to sign this off for this year, that it will go into legislation this year. The purpose is to promote gender identity, promote, not respect, promote. We need to start reading the words that we're saying. Promote gender identity and gender expression. What do we mean? Well, what do they mean by gender expression? LGBTQI+ learner has a right to choose the first name by which he or she wants to be known to educators, school, and fellow learners, irrespective of his or her gender characteristic or assigned sex at birth. Can you see the move away from biology? And it's no longer the doctor lifts you up and goes, oh, it's a girl, or oh, it's a boy. Now that is actually considered to be violence. Because you're imposing on that child their identity before they've decided what they are. I know it's difficult. But there it is. It's the assigned sex, and this is the legislation which wants to go through. And then integrating gender topics into the curriculum. Can you see that intrusion? Through story problems, writing prompts, readings, art assignments, or music. So this is already happening. I don't know if it's yet happening in our schools, but this is what's happening definitely in America. This is the the gender-bred person. And they are rolling it out. Oh, this has already been rolled out in the USA and the Netherlands and from the kindergarten, right from the beginning. Remember that malleable clay of kids? So their identity is in their heads. They're told that they have a spectrum of a gender identity. On the one side is woman, the other side is man. But remember that word queer is to liberate them from the norms. So you can be whatever you want, and we're liberating you from these ideas of woman or man. So there's gender queer, then there's gender expression. Are you more feminine? I think Rachel is going to go into more detail around the gender, the definitions. You express yourself as more feminine or more male. Be careful if you start expressing yourself as more, you have masculine traits. So this is the problem my husband has with me, is that I tend to be quite logical, and look, there's a rational eventually. So eventually the tears will pop out. But up until that point, I can be very rational, and then the tears pop out. But so we have feminine and masculine expressions, even though we are a male or a female. Now, unfortunately, what they're doing is they're hyper sensitizing us to, if anyone is a little more effeminate, a male's a little more feminine, oh no, he's a female. No, he's a little more effeminate. And a female who's perhaps a little more tomboyish, a little more rough and tough, oh no, she must be a male. So they are taking those things and they are accentuating them. Biological sex, now this was interesting because there was still biological sex in the genderbreed person, and this they say is your biology or your biological features, and I can't read that because I haven't got my glasses. Anyway, so it's really about the biological sex and then the intersex, and this is a real biological reality when they have both, but it's a really, 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 really small percentage of the population that have intersex. And then sexual orientation. So, you know, how do you like it? Heterosexual to homosexual to bisexual. So this is what they're giving in the kindergarten. But the problem was the gingerbread person looked like a man. And it comes from the idea of the gingerbread man. So that was not acceptable. So it has now been, remember, we're progressing. It's now progressed into the ginger unicorn. At least it's a little more intellectually honest because it's a mythical creature. It doesn't exist. But so what they do is, you can imagine for a 4-year-old that this is very cute. You put that picture down and you get them to color it in. It's very powerful. So there's the unicorn, and you've got all these pretty colors, and it's this mythical creature, and it's very sweet and all of that. But I want you to see the change as well. So we have the gender identity, the gender expression, and then we have the not biological sex, sex assigned at birth. So what is now happening is where gender was a social construct, so we constructed male and female in terms of our expression. Now it's not just that, it's your sex is a social construct. Remember, this is the postmodernism. There's no reality, there's no objective science or rationality or anything, so there's no biology. So when that doctor holds up the baby, it's like, oh, congratulations. It's a baby. So and then the child must then determine what they are later. So so now we already moved into now the sex assigned at birth. So just quick on the comprehensive sexuality education. Some of the concerns that we had with the scripted plans and also with the instructions given to the educators. So these are the instructions given to the educators of grade 5s. So they are pre-warned about parents. The teachers get pre-warned about parents. For grade 5s, this is in South Africa. So it warns parents may have their own views or prejudices about their children being exposed to some of the content in the scripted lessons plans. So it's a pitting of the state curriculum and teachers against the values of parents. Some of, they say it's not, and this is also the strategy I'm seeing. So when you say, okay, but Gramsci, and you look at the critical theory, and you look at the idea of the war of position, well, that looks like cultural Marxism, then they go, no, it's not. So when there's another big thing is that when you speak about the culture wars, and you say, well, there's actually kind of it's aggressive attack against certain cultures, and an undermining of cultures, and then the answer is, no, it's not. And the same here is when you say, well, the comprehensive sexuality education is perhaps, it's not appropriate for the age group that you're giving it to, and this looks like you are sexualizing the children and you are grooming them. No, it's not. So that's the kind of response that we're getting. So for grade 4s, 9-year-olds, these are in the scripted lesson plans, are showing graphic pictures of private body parts. So you are creating an interest before their time of which they should be seeing those things. You're creating an interest in it. Grade 9s, 10-year-olds are presented with a sexual assault scenario where private parts are grabbed. The 10-year-olds. In grade 7, these are 12-year-olds. They're told about masturbation and that it will not hurt you and others do, and it's perfectly acceptable. So you can see the progression and the slow and gradual move in terms of increasing interest. So again, let someone who was in this industry understand what it is. And I know this is going to sound a bit harsh, but part of what they're doing is they want to sexualize children because they want them to be sexually active. And they want them to be sexually active because they want to have not everybody's understanding it like this. But then the earlier they are sexually active, the more will have abortions. And this again is a very lucrative industry, but don't believe me. I want you to listen to, this is Carol Everett.
At first, it was again very much helping women to some degree, but my commission was $25 for each abortion. And my goal became to become a millionaire, because simple math told me 40,000 abortions a year would make me a millionaire. And so I went about creating the market to sell 40,000 abortions a year. We had one clinic open. We opened a second one. They pay for themselves the first month. Our goal was to have 5 surrounding the area. So I was out in schools and in other places doing everything I could to create that market, because our goal was 3 to 5 abortions from every girl between the ages of 13 and 18. I'm sorry to tell you, I held the hand of one young woman while she had her 9th abortion. There's over a 40% repeat rate of abortions today in this nation and in this state. Abortion is a method of birth control. So you find that girl as early as possible. You convince them that her parents really don't know anything about what's good for her. You break down the natural modesty, get her to laugh at her parents and their values. If she laughs with you about them, she will not go home and tell them. And then you give her low-dose birth control pills that you know she will not take accurately. And if they're not taken accurately, she'll become pregnant. Or you pass out defective or second condoms. Remember, the people that pass out those condoms don't buy the best quality. They buy seconds or defectives. And you do everything you can to make certain that you're getting the 3 to 5 abortions out of every girl.
Now, what do you think Planned Parenthood representatives would say to the things you just said? I mean,
they would just say that I'm absolutely crazy and that these children should be, they're going to have sex, so they need to be taught how to have safer sex. And when you hear someone say that now, you can just say baloney. We don't take kids out and get them really good and drunk and try to teach them how to drive safely drunk. We give them a moral absolute, don't drink and drive. Why would we give this child a low moral standard to live down to rather than the very highest and best God's plan, abstinence until marriage, which works every time?
Thanks. Okay. So obviously I'm a political scientist, so I'm also analyzing this in terms of a bigger picture. And so my question is are we here? So Hannah Arendt, she was a German Jew. She was in the concentration camps, but then she studied, she was a political scientist. She's no longer with us. And so she tried to understand totalitarianism as a political system, a complete and utter control of society, the economic, the social, the political, the societal, even to try and control the thinking. And she looked at the Nazi Germany, and she looked at the Soviet Union, the communist system of the Soviet Union, to try and understand the system, this regime of totalitarianism. And her definition for me is concerning. So she defined totalitarian society, one in which an ideology seeks to displace all prior traditions and institutions with the goal of bringing all aspects of society under the control of that ideology. So it appears that we are here again. Again, it's nothing new under the sun. The other thing that what Hannah Arendt, and some of you might know Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. He was excommunicated, or that's not the right word, but he was removed from the Soviet Union, and he exposed what was happening inside these labor camps, the gulags. And what he and Hannah Arendt and others who were observers of these totalitarian systems said is one of the key reasons in which they survived, and which they built, and which they continued, was on the basis of lies. But they had to get everybody to lie, and everybody to speak lies to each other, agree to the lies, because what you do is when you get people to lie and they know it's a lie, you undermine their integrity. And then you can control them completely. So we are sitting in very difficult times where we are being told to lie about biological realities. But it is a system and a form of control. So let's get practical, some suggestions, be grounded with God, family, and friends. We need to be different. We need to show that family is good, can be good, and it's enjoyable. Do not be ignorant. Equip and educate ourselves. Be firm in Christ. To not be deceived. To equip and educate others to live not by lies, but to live by truth. Because it creates human flourishing. And that's what history has shown us. That's where real flourishing is. Inside the boundaries created by our Creator, who knows us and defines us and knows what is good for us. Discern when you are engaging with a woke militant. Sometimes it's vain arguments and you just have to step back. And you have to just be quiet. But equip others so that we know what it is we're dealing with. Be brave. It's a time and a moment which we are needing to be brave. Our young people are needing to be brave. For parents, take up your God-given authority and responsibility. We can't now sit back and not read what is in the curriculum. We need to read what is inside of our kids' books. We need to see what the LO projects are. And we had an experience at the beginning of this year when our child got an LO project, which was absolutely deeply radical gender ideology. And it wasn't just us, we didn't know, but a number of parents pushed back because it was also an absolute denigration of boys, basically saying that they're all dominators and they all just want to be rapists. And enough parents had pushed back, they retracted the excerpt, they retracted the project. So parents, we mustn't underestimate the authority that we have, but also the responsibility that we have. Get involved in the school governing bodies, get involved in the prayer groups, read the books that they are reading, read the scripts of plays before your child goes up onto stage. Ask for the costumes that they're going to wear. We need to be much more engaged and much more involved than we used to be. Just some sources. If you haven't listened to Martin Iles, the truth of it, really, because obviously I come from a political background, he brings the political with the theological. PragerU also got some excellent equipping resources, new discourses. This is a mathematician who didn't think that the postmodern ideology was going to come into STEM, and it did. He is not, he's a secular humanist, so we're actually finding ourselves with a secular humanist. And he's really engaging with these ideas. So that's new discourses, books, Rod Dreher, Live Not by Lies, and equipping for where we are today. And the cynical theories, again, this is not a Christian book, but if you are interested in understanding the critical theories, it's there. And then I want to leave you with this. Ephesians 6, verses 13. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand.